Global Television, building the nation.
We talk about the Civil War, but we seem to ignore the fact that it was the manipulation of ethno-religious sentiment that eventually boiled over into that tragedy.
I think this is a negative part of what we are experiencing.
No shooting anymore.
We must come together.
We're all engaged in trying to
develop.
Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us here on Global Morning on Global Television in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. It's a wonderful half of the week, or if you like, the first half of the week, and then use that as a basis to gauge where we should be heading, how we should be prioritizing going forward to this day. So we thought we should also remind you that we're live around the clock. That is 247 on Star channel 276. You can also catch us across all social media platforms at Global Television, that is GlobaltvNG, so you can follow all of our conversations right there. Let's get a bit interactive. But in the meantime, on Global Morning, we want to take a look at big headlines in Nigeria, but across the world. A lot has happened in the last 24 hours. Osun State is big on the map now, for want of better words. All right, so Governor Adeleke has had his election upheld by the highest court in the land. Of course, that was yesterday. He's been congratulated by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. He's also been congratulated by the President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and we've seen several A-list personalities congratulate him, and jubilation has been a very visible, if you like, highlights in Osun State on account of yesterday's Supreme Court ruling over that case. But quickly, let's take a look at national dailies, because as expected, that story is replicated across papers this morning. So we begin with the Vanguard newspaper. It's one paper loaded with several stories this Wednesday. Says 10th NAS leadership, that's on the Vanguard newspaper. 10th NAS leadership, then he talks about crisis hits APC over zoning of Senate president. 10th NAS leadership, crisis hits APC over zoning of Senate President Speaker. Okay, that's like Kenny and I had said yesterday. That was a developing story in a manner of speaking, because there are parties, if you like, there are some individuals who are not very comfortable with those who have now been, as it were, quote unquote chosen, all right, to lead the National Assembly, both chambers of the National Assembly, by the way. Okay, let's see. Still stay with stories around NAS. It says NAS reverse endorsements of anointed candidates. Group urges APC. And then Sudan, JAMB assures on reintegration of evacuated Nigerian students. Presidential poll tribunal, I'll respond to Atiku's request for live broadcast. Tinubu, Osun Guba verdict, Oyetola congratulates Adeleke. All right, so let's turn to The Guardian now quickly and see what stories we've got on The Guardian newspaper. There's one here about, I'm sure it is about the power sector, apparently. Amid 168% tariff hike in 8 years, Nigerians pay premium for unavailable electricity. That's coming from the Guardian newspaper this morning. So you want to take a look at the Guardian, and then you will find that story there. Non-oil exporters receive 144 billion naira rebates in 14 months. Non-oil exporters receive 144 and 44 billion naira rebates in 14 months. Just to mention that one area of focus for our conversation this morning is that angle of non-oil exports. We'll be looking at agriculture, but that will be after we've taken a look at the papers this morning. Okay, Beavers to the rescue as Supreme Court affirms Adeleke Osun governor. All right, concerns over electricity generation as terrorists eye national infrastructure. That's a wake-up call for the security community in Nigeria to be proactive and be, if you like, 1,000 steps ahead of criminal elements who may want to sabotage the efforts of those who work on the clock to ensure that we have functional, robust, up and running, on-demand power supply system. Protecting critical national assets, vital to Nigeria's development, says Aregbesola. Of course, that cannot be overemphasized. On that note, we jump to the Punch newspaper. We will take a look at the Punch quickly for you. Front has a big story on today's Punch newspaper. All right. On the Punch, it says Presidential Poll Tribunal to consider PDP LP's live broadcast request. We understand that request is in front of the tribunal already. Now they've promised to consider it. So we'll keep you informed as to how it turns out ultimately. Okay, still staying with the Punch. Plateau Varsity security men repel gunmen attack. That's on today's Punch. Okay, so let's look at that big one. It says tribunal to consider PDP LP's live broadcast. Yes, we already brought you that a while ago. Speaker, 5 aspirants team up against Abbas. 5 aggrieved aspirants team up against Abbas. Okay, Otedola films over Transcorp deal. Elumelu keeps mum. All right, final victory. Buhari Tinubu congratulates Adeleke. Supporters jubilate. So we turn to Daily Trust newspapers for you now. Daily Trust, of course, has quite a number of stories as well for you. Quite a number of stories for you on the Daily Trust newspapers. Okay, it says inauguration disquiets as fan orders removal of aircraft from Abuja. Okay, Aerofire wants 80% for states, reverts to 1963 constitution. All right, so we've been having conversations, several conversations around constitution amendments. There are those who have said, look, if we want to move on as a country, as a people, or even as a government, we must revisit issues around the constitution. All right, so we've got work to do on that front. That's long and short of the story. But then we have the Nation newspaper, which also has quite a number of stories here for us. This morning, that's on the Nation newspaper. So let's see what we have on the Nation newspaper this morning. Quickly says petrol subsidy pushing Nigeria to bankruptcy, Sanusi warns. All right. Okay, National Assembly, Babio Abbas rally lawmakers. Okay, for support. But basically, let's see other stories here. My offer to buy Transcorp at 250 billion naira rebuffed, says $10. Okay, we had seen that's a story a while ago on Daily Trust as well. But let's see what other papers we've got here for you this morning. It says that though PDP chieftain on 2024 don't zone governorship ticket, but that's interesting because in Edo State, we understand there are those who are also interestingly clamoring for senatorial rotation of governorship. We understand that since 1999, that's been a big conversation in the states. Between 1999 and 2007, you had former Governor Lucky Osaka Egbenedio, all right, who is from Edo South. And then, of course, by 2007, Professor Osareme Osumbo had won the election, was declared winner by INEC. Incidentally, he's from Edo Central. All right, but then again, ultimately the courts removed him from office, and then Adams Oshiomhole became the governor of that state. Incidentally, Adams Oshiomhole is from Edo North, all right, and he left office in 2016, paving way for the incumbent governor, Godwin Enogagase Obaseki, who is from Edo South. So the question going forward is, where will the states be zoning to? Where will the governor emerge from in next year's election? I mean, going into next year's global election in the state. So I think that's obviously what the conversation is about. But we can only keep our fingers crossed and see how it pans out. Okay, so we're going to look at our last paper this morning, the Independent, all right? The Independent has several stories for us as well. One here says, inauguration, FAN orders airlines. Let's see that one for you. It's very important because we're just days away from the inauguration, by the way. It says, FAN orders airlines to relocate aircraft from Abuja Airport. Okay, that's from the Independent. And they also have one here that says, let's see, presidential election courts John Satiku, PDP, APM cases to May 11. And then Buhari canvasses support for a delegates program in Osho. I think that's some mileage for the governor, talking about Senator Ademola Adeleke, the president canvasses support for him so he can succeed in delivering leadership for the state. 2023 election, most hard-fought competitive race, Bajabia Mila, all right? That's also from the Independent. Buhari canvasses support for our delegates programs in Oshun. Yeah, that's a big story. And then RT 200 exporters repatriate $7.3 billion in 18 months, Miefele. Okay. Nigeria others contribute 97% of global preventable maternal mortality. Okay, so again, that's a piece of work for us as a country as it relates to maternal health. That in itself is a very pivotal issue for a country that seeks to develop on all fronts. Okay, so we are going to take a quick break now. Those are the papers we're looking at for you today. We do urge you, as always, to find out time. I mean, just make time to look at some of those stories, read up for yourself, and then stay ahead of your game. We'll take a quick break now. When we return, you will meet my guests, and then we'll put the conversation on the road. Stay with us.
We talk about the Civil War, but we seem to ignore the fact that it was the manipulation of ethno-religious sentiment that eventually boiled over into that tragedy.
I think this is a negative part of what we're experiencing.
No shooting anymore.
We must come together as Nigerians.
We are brothers and sisters. Nigeria first before your politics.
We're all engaged in trying to keep the country united.
For a nation to develop, conflicts must be minimized.
Peace and stability is extremely important for all.
My hope and prayer is that the Nigerian of our dream
Global Television, building the nation.
Thank you for staying with us on Global Morning here on Global Television, coming to you live from Nigeria's capital, Abuja. I'm Uyi Agbomofuegbe. Just to remind you that we're live round the clock 247 on Star Times channel 276. You can catch us as well across all social media platforms. The handle is at GlobaltvNG. Okay, so we want to look at something very topical, which again is pivotal to economic growth and national development. Time and again, we've heard that we must diversify from oil as a country if we must be able to, if you like, drag in more revenue and then be able to attend to very pressing issues as a country. But then it will appear oil, for want of better words, has become some sort of distraction for us. All right. So how do we diversify? What model should we be looking at? Because economists would always talk about model. What model should we be looking at? Is it possible to rake in as much from agriculture as we do from oil? Is that possible? What should be the framework in place? How much more work do we have in front of us to do? We've been able to get someone who understands these dynamics, especially from agriculture standpoint, to help us beat some context and perspectives into the conversation this morning. Joe Avery is an agri-business expert. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thanks, Louis. Thanks for having me.
Great. If I had not had a talk with you, you and I probably would be having my word against yours kind of moment now, because it will be difficult for you to convince me you are a farmer. Talk to me quickly. What has changed about farming in the last few decades?
Okay, the thing that has really changed in farming for the last few decades is the fact that usually parents, old folks are the ones who actually were really doing this farming thing, and not so much of young persons in it. So now that we are getting influx of young persons
coming to the
agri space, is one thing that has really driven the agricultural sector to a great extent in the last decade.
Well, that's great. I'm asking because the picture we had in our heads the whole time is, as a farmer, you've got to look dirty, you've got to look unkempt, you know, top to bottom, by the way. And then you just manage to get by. You live from hand to, so to speak, that kind of thing. But today we see a lot of scaling has happened in agricultural space. I mean, I know young people across this country, some of them with 2-3 degrees in the bag, all right? And none of those degrees, for example, is in any way related to agriculture. But you see them scaling, you see them making so much of progress, enormous progress, all right, in the agri space. Are we taking enough advantage of this reality that we have in front of us as a country and as a government?
Okay, I believe the government of the day has done a lot of things to actually push this and promote people who are going into the agricultural space. For example, I studied English and literary studies.
Can you imagine the distance between what you studied and what you're doing today?
It's far, far different. But I'm passionate about agriculture, and I know how agriculture can affect my current and my future society. That is why I engage in it. So, coming from the aspect of how much the government are looking at what is actually going on, I wouldn't say the government is not doing it. They are actually seeing this change happening. It's just that there's a narrative in our society that actually needs to change about agriculture for agriculture to really attain that it should be. So that is what I think.
Oh, great. I was going to talk to you about this as well. There are challenges associated with the agricultural business. I mean, people who come into the business of agriculture have to deal with certain challenges, whether it's power, whether it's motorable roads, their produce all the way from the farm to the markets in the cities or across the country, or you're talking about funding, for instance, all right? It has always been a challenge. So how are we able to surmount these challenges and still be able to raise our heads above the water?
Okay, the thing is that when you have passion for something, no matter the challenges that come, you must be ready to hit it heads on. That is, you must go at it with full force. So challenges will come. It's just that something in our society today is that most people are scared of challenges. See that there will be a tiny challenge, or there's this bridge to cross. They will want to cut corners. So we must first have to rejuvenate our mindset.
You're talking about reorientation now.
Reorientation. We need to get reorientation where we are actually going to. What is the potentials? Because if you see potentials in anything, you'll be able to cross any challenge to actually get there. the agricultural space is not one that is void of challenges. We have a lot of challenges in it. And some of those challenges includes funding. For example, for you to start an agricultural business, you must have funding. And there's one thing that I would always say, before you start any business, have a startup fund. Just have something that you as a person can start with. It is after you've started with your personal fund, that is when you'll be bold enough and strategic enough to start looking for funding everywhere. So you want to start agriculture, you must have something. If you don't have something, then what are you starting in essence? How tiny or little it is, there should be a little funding, or from, you have friends, you have families, relatives that should be able to buy into your idea of going into agriculture and support you. It is after you've started something, you can then go outside your vicinity, approach the government, and you get funding. And there are several funding opportunities that the government already created. It's just that sometimes the modalities at which these funding are released is something that is a bit sketchy, I wouldn't say, because the government have you in mind. They know that, oh, the farmers are part of the backbone of the society. So funding has gone out. But there is no follow-up to know if this funding already reached the rural area where the D happens.
The targeted beneficiaries.
The targeted beneficiaries. So that's what I'm trying to say.
You see, I was also thinking along those lines just at about dinner time yesterday, the issues around challenges for farmers across this country. But then there's something that's very concerning, value chain in the agribusiness. I've heard experts like yourself, key players, stakeholders talk about value chain, how there needs to be improvements. Walk us through what value chain ideally should be in the agric sector and where we are today in reality.
Okay. One vital value chain that is often underlooked is the marketing in agriculture. For example, there is no central body that controls the prices of agricultural commodity.
By way of regulation?
Yes. Then every farmer wants to sell directly in the market. Like other sectors, they are a body, they are agency, they are agents who will help you. There will be a standard price for everything. So when these value chains are then broken, though we've been trying to have an active value chain in the agricultural sector, there exists different value chain, but how effective is
it's a totally different ballgame
to actually what we are doing. And another thing, most farmers in our rural areas, most of them, they are uneducated. So when you have this experience and you want to impact or teach them these new ways, to say, okay, there's this way you can actually market your product that is actually different from your 4 days, 2 days market days that you have in clusters around. They want to say, do you want us to get hungry? You understand? So if those structures can be in place, a detailed, well-organized marketing system in agriculture, then we'll have a more sustainable agricultural practice everywhere.
Great. So when we talk like this, one of the things that stick out for me is the issue of, like you already mentioned, how government supports farmers, all right? I mean, I've followed the agricultural space very deliberately since, say, 2015, 2016, right? I realized that government is doing so much. I mean, whether it's federal, all right, several of them. But we've seen cases where people who are not even 1,000 foot close to the farm are more of beneficiaries of these efforts by government, these initiatives, laudable initiatives, I must say, by government, than those who are right on the farm and doing the work. How do we sanitize that process in such a way that it funnels down all the way from government being the benefactor, so to speak, to all the beneficiaries across board? How do we fix that?
It's easy. What the government has to do is that they need to be deliberate about what they are doing. If they really have this farmers, because see, most of these farming activities, they happen in the rural areas.
Sure.
Not in Abuja, not in Ministry of Agriculture. It happens in the rural areas. There's always a break. There's always a break within government releasing funds, supporting farmers. Who are they releasing this to? Not farmers directly.
Yeah.
So there's usually a break in that aspect of agriculture. And when there is a break like that, you see that what is supposed to go to these rural areas is either they are shortened, cut aside, or reduced by a set of persons. Now, what is the effect of this to those in the rural areas? Automatically, they've been disenfranchised of what they are supposed to get.
Right.
The impact on those farmers now is usually. So what the government needs to do, the government needs to set up an independent body that will monitor and track these funds until they get to the final consumer or the final users of these funds. So that independent body needs to be so independent that they can't be influenced. I won't say how much people can be. People can be influenced, but this independent body has to be there that can track these funds and make sure they get there.
Exactly, to minimize the chances of being compromised.
Yes.
So I want us to step up the conversation a little. Just at the top of the program a while ago, I was talking about how that several persons have argued that we can make far more from our agriculture than we do today. In a way, they're saying, look, we cannot continue to rely squarely on oil while paying lip service to agriculture and the potential that it carries. In what ways can we scale agriculture? Because we've seen countries who live solely, who depend solely on agriculture. It is like, say, the Netherlands, for example. You see what they are doing from just one line of produce, as against Nigeria that is blessed with several options. So what should we do? We've heard people say, okay, there's so much of corruption, there are systemic issues in the agri space. What specifically are these issues, and where is government missing it? Where can government get it right?
Okay. Some years back, we all know that agriculture was a major backbone.
The mainstay of the economy.
Of this economy.
Right.
So to return our society back to the way it was, strategies need to change. Strategies need to change. A state of emergency will need to be declared on the agricultural sector. Yes, governments are trying to salvage and do a lot of things.
Sure.
But these things, they are not enough. Priority needs to be given to the agricultural sector. Priority in the sense that from inputs to outputs, the government needs to be involved, set up agencies that actually get to these places where agriculture actually happens, not from the city calling shots. You need to set up these agencies in these rural areas.
Yeah. So that whatever efforts you're making, whatever support you're giving to them, must trickle down to the right persons.
Exactly. So it must trickle down to that place. Then the farmers and everybody within a farming community can say, oh, this here is from the government. This is how we can benefit from it. For example, I deal and specialize in the oil palm sector.
All right.
As a young man, I thought about agriculture and what is sustainable for me to go into. If you look into the oil palm sector, it's one sector that if we do a comparison, a detailed comparison between the oil palm sector and the crude sector, is one that can easily rub shoulders off with crude. But how many of these, you see that we have tiny clusters of oil palm farmers. You have some here. We just have about 3 major oil palm companies in this country. So the other larger ones, they are in clusters. You see, okay, farmer A has about 10 acres and the other has about 20 acres. So it's just that way. So if the government, and let me just say this, one of the major issues we have with agriculture is land. And you should also know that Nigeria has a great amount of land. We have large
arable
lands,
that's right,
for farming,
that's right,
that are not even utilized. So now, the country, the president, everybody needs to put their hand into agriculture to see how they can actually do their bits. Because the bits they are already doing is not enough. It's not actually getting to the rural areas. If we actually look at this thing in detail, you see, okay, it got to some areas. It didn't actually get to some areas. Like where I practice my farming, there's not government intervention in those areas. So those are some of the things that we keep saying. And now, if priority is given to agriculture, and agriculture gets a little backbone, it can actually help us achieve a balanced economy that is not entirely focused on oil production alone. Because we are at the mercy of crude oil.
Right.
If anything happens to the crude oil markets, the country, our economy and everything in shambles. So if we focus on agriculture and the government takes it as a priority, taking it as a priority, they need to put smallholder farmers in perspective too, not just large farmers, because these smallholder farmers, if you put all their farms together, it's actually something. Right. They are producing daily. So the government is just who we need to just come in.
Now that you've talked about smallholder farmers, and you talked about what they produce and how they contribute their own quota to the bigger picture as far as agriculture is concerned, I want to talk to you about something very concerning, how that some of our products, some of our agri outputs would get to, go beyond Africa, get to Europe, get to continental America as we know it. And then they tell you 39 of Nigerian products were rejected because of standards and so on and so forth. How concerning should that be for both stakeholders and the government and, of course, the regulators themselves?
It's so concerning because the reason why that usually happens is because of our local method of production that is not mechanized. For example, if you produce palm oil locally, the result you get is lower than you producing palm oil using the right industrial method. So those are some of the things we are looking at. So the government must be ready to put this infrastructure in place that these smallholder farmers who produce locally can actually see it as an opportunity to actually now get optimal production and good rating for their products. So when it gets to any place, it can actually meet the standard of those places, can meet worldwide standard. So
I've heard people say things like, if we do the right thing, agriculture can be the highest creator of jobs, creating opportunities for young graduates and so on and so forth. The irony of it all is you find young graduates or young people generally going into things like banking, all right, agriculture and all of that. When people say things like agriculture being oil and gas, is that the truth? Is that factual enough, or is this just building castles in the sky?
It's one fact. It's one fact that the only thing pulling these facts to the ground is a societal narrative that agriculture is meant for poor people.
Yeah.
Agriculture is meant to pull you out of poverty. After it has pulled you out of poverty, then you jump to another profession that you really love. You get.
Because you can't wear suit and tie to
exactly. So that is just it. So it's just the fact.
Let's talk about how we can diversify now, because that's a bit technical.
Yes.
It's not just enough to say leave oil, come into agriculture, or do both pari passu or side by side. There has to be a model we're following, because people like yourself, I've talked, we can, with some specifics, measure our progress, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. How can we do that from the end of the government and then from the end of the stakeholders themselves, including you?
Okay, this has to be a long-term project.
Long-term project.
It has to be a long-term project. It can't just happen overnight.
Right.
It can't happen overnight. First of all, you need people to run agriculture. You need persons. You need people to actually see potential in it. The government has a huge role to play because they need to create an enabling environment that will make young persons, young people actually see reasons to actually do agriculture. So we don't have to down talk crude oil or leave crude oil. We can actually do both. And if you look at the crude oil sector, they have a working mechanism there that needs to be created in agriculture. If that can be achieved in agriculture, that agriculture now has, if you want to, your products in agriculture, this is how they go, this is how they go.